So the sugi we want to cover today on Daf Samach Tes Amid Beis is typical of a sugi that on the one hand is related to Nedarim, but on the other hand it goes way, way beyond the confines of Nedarim. So we'll take a look at Boi Rabbah on Samach Tes Amid Beis, and you'll see this approximately let's see, we're counting up from the bottom of the Amud, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines, the last word in the sixth line above the end of Samach Tes Amud Beis. Boi Rabbah. Kiem umufar lichi bevasachas mahu. We know that both the husband and the father were granted the power and the authority to either be Mekayim, their daughter or wife's neder, or to be mefer the neder. And Kiyum and Hafara are two opposites, right? L'kayim is a neder means that the neder is valid, and lahafar a neder means to invalidate the neder. And this individual, whether it be the father or whether it be the Baal, decided that in one fell swoop, he wants to be Makayim the Neder and Mefer the Neder. This is what you call in the Gemara's language a Tarti Desasre. They're mutually exclusive. Mahu. We'll see what the suffix is in just a minute. And the Gemara resolves this suffix by invoking a principle of Rabbah. And if you take a look in the Masoras HaShas, you'll see that the principle of Rabbah applies in the Gemara in Erevin, the Gemara in Kedushin. And that is called Dover she'ein bazeh harzeh afilu b'asachas eino. Two things that contradict each other so that they couldn't be one after the other. For example, if a man would be Mekadesh two sisters, first he's Mekadesh Rachel, then he's Mekadesh Leah. Once he's Mekadesh Rachel, Leah is Achos Ishto, and that's an Erva, and Ein Kiddushin Tovsin Bi'arayos. So the second Kiddushin cannot be Chal after the first. He can't be married to two sisters. So Rabbah in Masechet Kiddushin and Daf Nun Amid Beis says that if he's Mekadesh both sisters simultaneously, and he gives, let's say, to a shliach two prutos, one for Rachel, one for Leah, and he's Mekadesh in one Maisa of giving the two prutos to a shliach, both Rachel and Leah, is Eno. Eno means it's not Chal. Neither Kiddushin is Chal. He's not married, even Safek Kedushin, neither to Rachel or to Leah, because of the mutual exclusion of these two Kedushins. Here too, says the Gemara, since he cannot be Makayim the Neder and be Mefer the Neder one after the other, once he's Makayim the Neder, he cannot be Mefer the Neder or reverse. Therefore, it's Lesser Bazecher Zeh, cannot be Chal one after the other, they're mutually exclusive. One contradicts the other, and therefore Filu Vasachas Eino, and both the HaKama and Hafara are null and void, and we'll see in a minute what that means. So what I'd like to take a look at is a machlokas here between the Ran and the Rosh as to how to interpret this Gemara. So we'll put this Gemara on the side for a moment, because in the Otzer Hayunim, he gives you a very fine overview of the suffix itself, and you'll see this here on page Peites, which is the first page I gave you, and it's Aleph Bir Suffix HaGemara. So if you fast forward for a moment to the third paragraph in that section Aleph, you'll see a summary of this suffix according to the Ran. And he says the following: there was no doubt that both a Hafara and HaKama cannot be Chal simultaneously. And if one came first, the other one would be invalid. Kodam echad mehem lechavero. Lechavero means to its other colleague, so to speak. So he starts with Hafara and ends with HaKama, or vice versa. Zeh shekodam yochul. The first one would take effect. Like, for example, in the case of Kiddushin, he was Mekadesh Rachel, so that Kiddushin would be valid. Vasheni lo yuchal lochel. It's impossible now, after the Hafara, to have HaKama, or after the HaKama, to have Hafara. He cannot be Mekadesh Leah once he was Mekadesh Rachel. Umemela, L'gabi kol echad v'echad, this is the key of keys here in the Ran, anu misupakim. We never really know when he says b'vasachas, which one came first. If we would know which came first, that would be fine. Then the first one would be chal, and not the second one. So he says the following. Anu misupakim, this is in the paragraph, ubibir hasafek. These are other pages in the, this is a massive article. It goes on and on. So I wasn't able to photocopy everything, and I apologize for that. But we'll give out these pages later as we get to them. So with regard to the suffix of the Gemara, if anyone wants to take even a picture right now and send it around, that's okay. So the Ran in the paragraph ubibir, you have that paragraph ubibir, yeah. Ubibir as-suffix. So the Ran says again, if one would have come first, either the Hafara or the HaKama, then the first one would be chal, the second one would not be chal, because they're mutually exclusive. However, here we're in a suffix situation because he used the term bivasachas, which means they're both simultaneous. So therefore, l'gabi kol echad v'echad, with regard to either the Hafara or the HaKama, anu misupakim, we really can't determine. Shema hu chal, maybe it was first, v'chavero lo chal. Again, we don't know. Is the Hafara going to be chal and not the HaKama that comes second, or the HaKama first and not the Hafara that comes second? Because again, he said b'vasachas. So even though he may have said one before the other, he may have said mufar loch and then mukam loch, but it doesn't matter because he says b'vasachas, meaning he wants them both to be chal simultaneously, which is an impossibility. So now we're in a suffix situation. We really don't know which one is chal. Shema HaKama chala, umemela Hafara lo chala. And now watch what the Ran does. The Ran says that we have a suffix that maybe the HaKama came first, and the Hafara can't be chal because the Baal or the Av only has a one-time shot at either or. He can, once he's Makayim the Neder, he no longer has rights to be made for the Neder. And we'll see in a minute how the Gemara is poshet this suffix based on Rabba's principle kol she'einu b'zeh chazeh afilu v'asachas eino v'tzorech levar kavanas haran ma'u atzad hasuffix lomer sheyochul echad kodem lechavero. He says, what are the two tzadim in the suffix? One side is that the Hafara came first, and the other side is that the HaKama came first. That's very weird. We know that neither of them came first because they were both vasachas. That's what he stipulated. So what kind of suffix does the Ran have over here that maybe this one is first and therefore the HaKama should be chal? Maybe the Hafara came first and the Hafara should be chal and not the HaKama when they were both simultaneous. Yeah, so it's a very strange thing that the Ran is actually postulating a suffix here. It's really not a suffix because on each side of the suffix, you have a situation in which the other one is going to be docha the first one. So how can you tell me that maybe this one came first? Your tzad, if you're voting in favor of the Hafara, you're saying the Hafara came first. Your nota in favor of the HaKama because the HaKama came first. I mean, how could that be possible? Neither of them came first. The Rosh is going to offer another pshat in this sugya to solve this problem. Umadua shenomar kein sheyochel echad v'yitches chaveru milochel kevon sharei hechil l'shneim. He decided that both of them should be chal b'vasachas. Umay ulma zemi say, how can you have a tzad to say that one came first and takes power, so to speak, over the other? Not only that, there's another problem in the Ran. The Ran says that in the Havamina, before the Gemara is poshet this suffix, that neither of them could be chal. That's the final conclusion of the Gemara based on Rabbah. But in the Havamina, one of them would be chal and not the other. And the Ran takes a position as to which one would be chal. And in the Salkedaitach, the Ran says that the HaKama would be chal and not the Hafara. If there's such a Havamina that the HaKama should be chal and not the Hafara, then we cannot apply the principle of Rabbah. The Gemara wants to be poshet by saying that since Rabbah says it is Eino Bazecher Zeh, therefore cannot be b'vasachas. What do you mean it cannot be b'vasachas? The Ran is already committed that if it would be a b'vasachas, then the HaKama would be chal and not the Hafara. So now we move on to the Rosh. So again, just to summarize, what we have is, according to the Ran, the suffix in the Gemara and the Havamina was which of the two would be chal, because which one came first? And we don't understand, according to the Ran, why one of them could have possibly, in the Havamina and the Gemara, come first when he said b'vasachas, they should both be chal simultaneous. And now we get to the Rosh. The Rosh says the following, and this is on the third line of a paragraph that starts Omnam. Do you have a paragraph Omnam? Mm-hmm. On the third line, he says the following: Mi Amrinon. He's going through the Tzadim of the suffix. Tfos Lashon Rishon. Maybe we should apply a principle of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir is of the opinion that when a person says, he looks at an animal and he says, Harezu Ola, Harezu Shlomim, then Tfos Lashon Rishon. We assume that he had a Gemira Stas and he was serious about that which came out of his mouth first. And then he wanted to change his mind, but once it's already Kadosh B'Kedushas Ola, he doesn't have the power to change and transfer the Kedusha from that of an Ola to a Shlomim, so it remains Tfos Lashon Rishon as an Ola. So the Rosh wants to take Rabbi Meir's principle and apply it, plug it in here. And he wants to suggest that it all depends in the Havamina of the Gemara what came out of his mouth first. If he said Kama Lichi and then he said Mufar Lichi b'vasachas, since the HaKama came first, that's going to be chal under the principle of Tfos Lashon Rishon. O Dilma, what was the other tzad in the Gemara's suffix? Kevon di Amron b'vasachas. Forget about Tfos Lashon Rishon. Tfos Lashon Rishon means when he said two things, one came before the other. But here he adds the term b'vasachas, because the Rosh has the girsa. If you'll take a look earlier in this section, there are different girsos in our Gemara, but the Rosh had the girsa that he added the words b'vasachas, and therefore chala hafara u'mevateles HaKama. Notice that the Rosh takes the opposite view of the Ran. The Ran in the suffix, if there's a possibility that one of the two would be chal, the Ran insists that it's dafka the HaKama that would be chal. The Rosh insists that if you don't apply the principle of Tfos Lashon Rishon because he added the words what? B'vasachas, therefore it's the Hafara that would be chal and not the HaKama. So we now have a very profound challenge to try to figure out the Ran and the Rosh on this issue.
What's the reason that he prefers?
He doesn't give us a clue.
Doesn't give any idea.
That doesn't give us any idea. He leaves it.
Is he saying though that both are chal though? In other words, that you can the HaKama is chal and then the Hafara basically negates that the HaKama is chal. It's not that he's saying that the Hafara is chal.
Right. That could be a very good answer to Tzvi's question. Why should the Hafara be chal and not the HaKama? Because according to one side in the suffix, the Hafara somehow negates the HaKama. And that power to negate the HaKama and uproot the HaKama overpowers the HaKama. But the problem is that all of this sugya, from A to Z, from beginning to end, is based on the following premise, that once the Baal or the Av is Makayim the Neder, he no longer could be made for the Neder. So that if the Rosh is insisting that the Hafara comes to negate the HaKama, and we're not going to apply the principle in this side of the suffix of Tfos Lashon Rishon, and therefore we're free to take the Hafara that came after the HaKama, even if he said, he expressed himself, make him lichi, u'mefer lichi, but once he adds b'vasachas, we negate Tfos Lashon Rishon. So the fact that the HaKama came first is irrelevant, but nevertheless, why does the Rosh conclude that the Hafara is misgaber, right, koach gavra, and overpowers the HaKama? Well, after all, HaKama is a positive force, Hafara is a negative force. Why is the negative force more powerful than the positive force? And once a Baal or an Av exercises rights to be making the neder, he no longer has the power to be made for the neder. Yeah, what do you want to say? I'm sorry, you were saying something, and I just wanted to finish.
No, your phraseology eliminated what I was going to say. I was going to say that
I didn't mean to eliminate anything. I really didn't. You know, today is Asar B'Teves. We don't want to eliminate anything.
If you talk about that once there's HaKama, there's no Hafara. Here b'Vasachas, there wasn't a HaKama for Hafara.
Correct.
So
what was it sad to say that Hafara defeats the HaKama if both are chal together? Yeah,
maybe like a Tochidei Dibur. It doesn't use Tochidei Dibur, but the HaKama, maybe both are happening, but it never really gets off the ground. In other words, Varachad, you're able to undermine it so quickly. You know, again, you have to think of it more concrete.
Right, but that Hafara,
that's the first lashon rishon.
the Hafara,
I think it's saying the same thing. Right, he doesn't use that phrase, so it's hard to
but then the Hafara comes as a negation of the HaKama. And he says, you know what? I changed my mind. I don't want, but the only problem is he says Rasacha, so he really wants the HaKama. He doesn't want the Hafara more than he wants the HaKama. There's no Gili Milsa here. So in the side of the suffix that we negate Tfos Lashon Rishon, why does the Hafara overpower? There's something about the Hafara that's greater than the HaKama.
Well, what's the default status?
That was what I'm saying. It should be just the opposite, you think. Because the default status, if the Hafara and the HaKama cancel each other out, then it's left Mukam.
Who holds to that Shita? The Ran. The Ran is going to say that in the Gemara's Havamina, it's the HaKama that wins out. Why? Because if the two blow each other up, right? It's like you throw a remote yacht and everything gets blown up.
Then it's just left.
Then you're left as it is, and the neder remains chal, because until you're made for the neder, the Rosh's chiddush is that in the Gemara's side that we don't apply Tosos Rishon, it's the Hafara that takes place. Now the Hafara is a kuvase that has to come as a negative force to change the status quo. And if you don't know that the Hafara is more important, there's something, again, you have to come to the conclusion in the Rosh's frame of reference that there's something inherent in the Hafara that's greater than HaKama. And for that, I want to learn Reb Chaim, which is on the next page that I gave you out, but we're not ready for it yet. But I just want to say this is where Berzon comes in, so to speak. The Reb Chaim doesn't mention a word about the Rosh. He's operating with the Ran and with the Rambam, as we'll soon see. But I think if we really understand the depths of what Reb Chaim is saying here, perhaps we could shed a light on the Rosh and explain why Hafara, in a case where it's B'Vasachas, will override and overcome the HaKama.
I would have said that the Rosh position intuitively makes more sense, because the default is that it's going to be chal, right? The husband doesn't say anything is going to be chal. So the purpose of the Hafara is to undo the neder. The purpose of the HaKama isn't to make the neder good. The purpose of the HaKama is simply to take away the option of Hafara.
So why is Hafara greater than HaKama? I think what you're saying, if I accept your svara, I think the Ran is correct, that if we don't have a Hachra here, then it's the HaKama that should be chal. Why? Because the Hafara is coming to negate the HaKama, and we don't have a Hafara here.
The HaKama addresses the Hafara. So the HaKama only works if it's before the Hafara, and it's not before the Hafara. But the Hafara just has to be after the neder, and we're after the neder. So Bavas Achas doesn't.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure about that. Before we see Reb Chaim, I just want to add two more paragraphs here. As I said, this essay is massive. It would take me a year to go through the essay. But at the end of this paragraph, he has upirish nosaf. Do you see I underline that?
Yeah.
Upirish nosaf, pirish bazer rosh, shekevan shechalim shneim hakama v'afara, ein anu yodim im chala hakama o chala hafara. In the Rosh's second shot, it seems that he backtracks. He's not willing to, even in the Havamina, to maintain that one is superior to the other. And therefore, what we're left with is a suffix. Now, I'm not sure what this suffix is. And we saw already in the Ran a precedent for this suffix. Let's go back again to the paragraph Ubir Asofek Kosav Haran, that Vade ain't Shneim Yicholim Lachul Ki Achas. And then we fast forward, and he says, Lachein on the fourth line, Anu Misupakim, Shema HaKama Chala. And for some reason, the Rosh only has that possibility, but the Ran only has that possibility, but the Rosh says, let's be consistent. If you're going to say that there's a suffix Shema HaKama Chala, and therefore the Hafara can't be Chala after the HaKama, then we should have another tzad in this suffix to say that the Hafara is Chala, and therefore there's no room for HaKama after Hafara. And that's exactly what the Rosh is offering in the second interpretation. But again, this is just Berzon talking, and you can either accept this or reject this. I don't believe for 1 minute that when the Ran and the Rosh are utilizing the word suffix, the concept of suffix, they mean what we think they mean. This is not a suffix. Suffix means I don't know whether it happened this way or it happened that way. I don't know if this is Shuman or this is Chelet. That's a suffix. That's what we call iyediyah. Or, for example, if there's a tarovas, a visa, a heter, I might have a suffix whether the rov is isur or the rov is heter. That's a bona fide suffix, and we're going to apply principles, suffix d'orais l'chumra, suffix d'rabbanan l'kud. That's not what the Ran and the Rosh have in mind. This is not a suffix of, I don't know if it's this or if it's that. This suffix is ingrained, is inherent in the halacha itself. The halacha recognizes both Hafara and HaKama. The halacha imagines that one came first. In a case where they both came simultaneously, the halacha ends up with a suffix, not because we don't know, not because either one is greater than the other. We don't know which is greater. We don't know which came first and takes over. The HaKama took over, the Hafara took over. This is what I heard from my Rebbe once, not in this context, Bein Hashmashos. The Gemara all over the place, especially in Masechet Shabbos in the second parak, speaks about Bein Hashmashos, Sofek Yom, Sofek Laila. So if Soloveitchik used to always say, we misunderstand what that means. We think it means we don't know whether Bein Hashmashos belongs to the previous day or belongs to the night that follows. That's not what it's all about. It's not a suffix of iyediyah. The Rav used to call it, and I think it is a breakthrough shita, it's a suffix of tarte de sasre. The halacha itself builds this suffix. It's ingrained in the halacha. If you go through the psukim, there are psukim that say vayerev vayivoka, that it seems that the transition period is erev, and there are other psukim that say it depends on the ma'oros, and that yom v'layla depends upon the sun and the stars. And basically, the Torah itself gives us two definitions of yom and layla, and they contradict each other in the case of Bein Hashmashos. Here too, the Torah is giving us two powers, one power of Hafara, one power of HaKama. We don't know which one is Chal because they're both Chal. As a result of both being Chal, we end up with what we call b'merchot kfulot a suffix, but it's not the classic suffix. It's a suffix that's built on tarti desas. Okay, ad kan akofal. Now we get to Reb Chaim, and again, I went through a lot of this essay. My time has been very limited lately because this week we had the shloshim for my mother-in-law. It took up a lot of that time. We had different things and different parts to it. And last night I gave a shir for the shloshim, but I did manage to find this Reb Chaim. Now I want to tell you that this is on page Tzadihei, right? You have that?
Yeah.
It should be the second page. And I want to tell you that I have personally a vested interest in this Reb Chaim, just emotionally. And I'm going to let the cat out of the bag. I'm a gigantic fan of a sefer called Ishim V'Shitot. Are you familiar with it? Anybody know who authored this? This is Rav Zevin. Do you know what Rav Zevin is most famous for? Okay, maybe. You might be right. Maybe I'm wrong. But I think he's most famous for the Encyclopedia Talmudit, which I'm a great fan of. He was the creator of the Encyclopedia Talmudit. Not only that, he died after the first volume was published, and all the volumes subsequently, I think they're almost up to the 30th volume, are all based on the first volume. It was really a radical breakthrough, but he's written many, many Sfarim. But my favorite sefer is this one called Ishim V'Shitot. And within the sefer, my favorite chapter is on Rav Chaim Brisker. And in this chapter, he builds a lot on our understanding of Reb Chaim and what his breakthrough, his methodology was based on the Reb Chaim that we're about to learn now. So I just want to tell you in advance, and maybe we'll photocopy these pages, or maybe if you don't mind, I don't know, are we able to take pictures now or it's too late? Let's just see where we want to. So it starts here on the bottom of page 55. And it goes on to 57. So it's really 3 pages, although we're not going to go through all those 3 pages. Okay. What is Reb Chaim dealing with? Reb Chaim is dealing with the Shitas HaRambam. The Rambam paskins, and I'll read the Rambam to you. It's not on this page, I don't think, but it's the Nedarim Perek Yud Gimel Halacha Chav Beis. The Rambam paskins Amar La Chaim Umufarlach Bivas Achas. Chaim Umufarlach Bivas Achas. That's our sugya. I'm not going to read the next three words, and just you tell me what you anticipate the Rambam is going to say in the next three words. The Gemara has a suffix about this case, and the Gemara finally concludes that Kol she'eno b'zecher zeh, Rabba's principle, b'vasachas eno, which means that neither the HaKama nor the Hafara is chal. Correct? Says the Rambam, harei zeh kayel. So there are two questions we're going to ask on the Rambam, and all the Mefarshei Rambam are mislabtim b'shtei shelos elu. Question number one is the Gemara doesn't come to any conclusion that either one is superior to the other. So the Rambam is against the Gemara. And question number two is why does the Rambam logically feel compelled to tip the scale in favor of Chaim? Again, this is not the Ran. The Ran says that since we have a suffix whether the kiyum is chal and the hafar is not, therefore the kiyum is going to be negated by the hafara. The hafara negates the kiyum. And Reb Chaim comes up with a breakthrough. And he says the following: in this battle, in this tug of war, this confrontation between Hafara and HaKama, two different things are happening. Yeshno chiluk bein ma she'ein Hafara li'achar HaKama levein ma she'ein HaKama li'achar Hafara. So again, all of the sugi is based on the fact that b'zecher ze'eno, that you could not have Hafara after HaKama, you could not have HaKama after Hafara. But Reb Chaim says that when you apply those two principles, they are fundamentally different one from the other. The masha'ein hafara achar hakama, hu mitam shekoach hafara, hu lechazek es haneder, hu levatel koach hafara. When the Torah gives the father or the Baal the rights of hafara, that's on a regular neder. But there's a neder which is more chazak than the normal neder. That's a neder that has what attached to it? Kiyum. When the father is makayim the neder, it upgrades the neder, and that creates a koach ha-neder, which now makes hafara impossible. So again, to read the language here, he says koach hakama lechazek es ha-neder ulevatel koach hafara. The koach hafara cannot impact on a neder that has a hakama to it. The hakama changes the neder, upgrades it, intensifies it, and makes it more chamur in such a way that now the neder doesn't lend itself to what? To hafara. Masha'ein Katie says, HaKama achar hafara. In HaKama achar hafara, it's not that the hafara precludes as a koach, the halacha, the legal status of hafara is such that now it fights against the HaKama. Ella, why is it that the HaKama can't be chal after the hafara? Mishum the kevan shaneder hufar edo kayam. The neder doesn't exist anymore. It's history. Ain't shaykh lahakim. HaKama means to be makayim a neder, but there is no neder. Ha-neder kvar einenu. V'eino mitzad shekoach hafara hu levatel es HaKama. It's not that there's a head-on collision between two kochos and one koach overrides the other. Like in the case of HaKama, which has a koach to change the neder in such a way that it negates hafara. So the HaKama can negate the hafara. That's a legal process. But in the case of hafara first, it's not a legal process. It's once the hafara does what it does, there's no room for HaKama. Why is there no room for HaKama? Because there is no neder anymore.
But that's only if you hold that as bezeh achar zeh.
Right, once it's
One after the other. If it's bavas achas, then it's not. Then that doesn't fit.
Again,
If it's bavat achat, then
we're asking Howie the following question. It's not bezecher zeh. Reb Chaim says, okay, what do you mean when you say it's not bezecher zeh? You should realize, says Reb Chaim, and it's going to have an impact, that you're saying two different things when you say it's not bezecher zeh. Because when you're saying that the Hafara can't come after the HaKama, you're saying something about the power and the koach of the HaKama. The koach of the HaKama negates Hafara. Why is that? Because the neder is changed, and once there's a neder with HaKama, it's not like a neder without HaKama, and therefore precludes Hafara. So the Hafara power cannot operate once the neder has been subject to what? To HaKama. So there's something inherent in HaKama that excludes the Hafara. But don't tell me that it's not Bezecher Zeh. In the flip side, when there was Hafara and then HaKama for the same reason. It's not true, says Reb Chaim, that there's something inherent in the Koch Hafara that negates HaKama. But what happens is there's no HaKama after Hafara because there's no neder. So therefore, Reb Chaim insists that according to this is all to explain the Rambam Shita, Ein mitzad sheyesh koach ba'hafara levatel es HaKama. Od yisei agrach. Now we go on to the second stage of Reb Chaim. Now we get to the principle of Eino b'vasachas, right? So this is, till now we're focused on b'zecher zeh Eino, and now Rabbah says, well, if it's b'zecher zeh Eino, then b'vasachas Eino. Says Reb Chaim, Kol she'eino b'zecher zeh afilu b'vasachas Eino, hu machmas. What generates this principle of Rabbah, which is going to apply in many sugyas in Shas, hu machmas sheksha'osa shnei masim hasosrim zed zeh. Now watch what happens. Reb Chaim is now going to really delve deep into the situation of Vasachas. What happens in Vasachas? He says the following. He does two maisim, right? Like he marries Rachel and he marries Leah. Or he does Hafar, he does HaKama. Haresha Hechel, what he generates is Siba L'shtei Chaluyos. There's a reason why the Hafara should be Chal, and there's a reason why the HaKama should be Chal. He did these two maisim. V'chol Siba, Harehi Mevateles Es HaChalos Shel HaSiba Shniya. There is a head-on collision here, a battle between the two sibos that underline the two maisim. Because the siba of one maisa is antithetical to the siba of the second maisa. V'lachein lo chal klal. This is the principle of Rabbah that b'vasachas eino. Why? Because each one of these two maisim negates the other maisa, because the siba that generates the maisa is antithetical to the other siba. V'lachein lo chal klal. He cannot create two maisim. Each one has an underlying logic behind it, a siba that generates that maisa, and it's antithetical to the other maisa. Each maisa negates the other one. Shekol chalos eni yachol. The chalos hafara can't be chal because of the chalos HaKama. The chalos HaKama can't be chal because of the chalos hafara. Machmas siba shel chalos hashniya monas mimena lachol. So when you look at the two chaloyos and you compare them, one generates a siba that negates the other. Lachein. Oh, now we get to the final conclusion of all this very conceptual analysis. Kosav agrach, shekol dino shel Rabbah, hu dafka, b'shtei chalios shemonos achas es hashniya milachol. We look at the chalos of the Hafara, we look at the chalos of the HaKama, and each chalos presents a barrier that makes it impossible for the other chalos to be chal. That's Rabbah. Aval, but here in this case of Hafar and HaKama, b'shtei chalios she'enam yecholos lochul b'yachad, machmas chisaron mitziuti. If it's not that the sibas hachalos al pi din is antithetical to the other sibas chalos, but the reason why one contradicts the other is because of the mitzius, not because of the din, but rather because of the reality. Lo machmas shechalos achas. This you should underline. But lo machmas shechalos achas monas min hashniya. If it's not that one chalos prevents and is antithetical to the other chalos, then we don't have the din of Rabbah, because the din of Rabbah, the principle of Rabbah, bazechar zeh eno is therefore vasachas eno, is because bazechar zeh is eno because one chalos is antithetical to the other chalos. You have two chaloyos that fight and battle each other, one against the other, because that's exactly what the nature of the chalos is. The chalos is hafara and not HaKama. The chalos is HaKama, not hafara. But says Reb Chaim, that's not so. In this case, it's not so that the chalos hafara is going to prevent the HaKama. What the chalos hafara accomplishes is it negates the neder, and that he calls chisaron mitziuti. If the neder is gone, there's no room for HaKama. So it's not like the HaKama that has a chalos that prevents the hafara because it changes the nature of the neder and makes it impossible for hafara to be chal. That's not so in the case where the hafara came first. If the hafara came first, it's not that the hafara prevents and negates the chalos HaKama, but rather once there's a hafara, there is no neder, and that he calls a chisar mitziuti. Ulefi zeh bir agrach shelegabe hafara shebazeh yesh kan siba shemonas min hafara lachul. I think that just 1 second. Just 1 second. I'm sorry. I think there's a little bit of a mistake here. Lefi zeh bir agrach shelegabe hafara shebazeh yesh kan siba. I think it should say legabe HaKama. I just want to say, does anybody have a pencil here? I just want to. Okay, I have a pen. I think this word hafara is I'm sorry. Let me just read on and say. I just sometimes if I find a typo, and I find typos here. Shebazeh yesh kan siba shamonas min hafara lachul. Sharei sibas HaKama monas min hafara lachul. What's the sibas hafara? Meaning, what's the essence of the mechanism and the chalos of HaKama is that it changes the nature of the neder and makes that neder in something that negates hafara. Lochein lo chal hafara. Once you've changed the neder and you've upgraded it through HaKama, it no longer allows for hafara to be chal. Aval HaKama, meaning if you want to know why HaKama can't be chal after hafara, the hafara doesn't prevent the HaKama, it doesn't fight a battle against the HaKama. What's the ultimate reason why the HaKama can't be chal if there's hafara? It's because of the mitzias that there is no neder, v'lachein chala HaKama. He says the following: Lefi zeh kavanas hagmar lo chiach mi rabba shelo chal b'vasachas HaKama v'hafara u'memela hafara lo tochel ki HaKama soteres la. So the principle of Rabbah is that when you have two things that are mutually exclusive, and each one has a reason why the other chalos can't be chal, neither of the two chalos can be chal, and each one negates the other one. And that's going to apply as far as the hafara after HaKama is concerned. The HaKama has within it a chalos HaKama that is mevatel the koach hafara. So there is a bittul of the koach hafara. It's a actual siba hamonas chalos hafara. Aval HaKama tochul. There's no reason why Rabbah's principle should apply to undermine the HaKama. Why? Because again, if Rabbah's principle is that one chalos contradicts the other, and one koach is opposite the other, that's not true in the case of hafara vis-a-vis HaKama. It's not that the hafara is going to prevent the HaKama from chal, but rather the hafara changes the situation on the ground, and the mitzias is that there is no neder. So therefore, the way that the Rambam understood our sugya of Rabbah is that the Gemara wants to say that as far as the chalos hafara is concerned, that can't be chal, and the reason for that is because b'vasachas he wanted HaKama to be chal. The HaKama has a koch to be mevatel hafara, but the other way around, the hafara to be mafkia the HaKama, that doesn't apply in Rabbah's favorite reference. Why? Because it's not that the chalos hafara is such that it has a power inherent in it to negate and undermine the HaKama. That's not so. And it's only a chisaron b'mitzias. Now, the rest of this page is an attack against Reb Chaim by none other than the Chazon Ish. If anybody knows the history of it, the Chazon Ish on his copy of Reb Chaim wrote extensive notes, and in each one of these notes he attacks Reb Chaim. It's almost as if he had an axe to grind, almost. And this is no exception. Now, I'm not sure that the Chazon Ish wrote these notes for publication. These were his own private notes, but some, I don't know who, decided to publish them. And in the new editions of Reb Chaim, in the back section of the book, you have the Gilyonos of the Chazon Ish. And this is one of them. Let's just read one more paragraph before I want to present to you Rav Zevin, because as I told you, I have an axe to grind here. Hosef Agrach, shebe'emes yesh lachar b'divrei Rabba shekol she'ena b'zerach zefil v'asachas. In b'chol mokom sheyesh shtei chaluyos she'enon yecholim lochol b'vasachas lo chal afilu chalos achas. Right? If you can, so the first way of defining Rabbah is not Reb Chaim's approach. Reb Chaim is just offering it as a possibility that maybe what Rabbah is saying is that these two chalosim can't be chal v'asachas, so neither one is going to be chal. Oh, but rather in the second possibility of this chakir of Reb Chaim, this is the one that Reb Chaim was pushing for before. Dafka k'shekol chalos monasas hachalos hashniya. Then it's impossible for them vasachas. There's no koach habitul of one chalos vis-a-vis the other one, but rather it's only a mitzius. Then lo nemar din zeh upazeh nechleku Rambam v'Aran. This is the machlokas between the Rambam and the Ran. What is the maskana of our sugya after the Gemara quotes the principle of Rabbah? Haran sover. If it's impossible for the both chaluyos to be chal simultaneously, then we apply the din of Rabbah, and both chalosim are negated, which might mean many different things. It might mean that if the day passes, then the neder is chal. It might be that we'll give him a little bit more time during the balance of the day to decide which one of the two he wants, because both negate the other one. The Rambam limits the principle of Rabbah, and it only applies when one chalos monas is a chalos hashniya, which is true vis-a-vis the HaKama being monas, the chalos hafara, but it's not true in the other way around, the reverse, that the hafara is monas, the chalos of the HaKama, but rather, as we said many times, there's no neder at all. And then he quotes for the balance of this page, all the complaints and the arguments raised by the Chazon Ish. I just want to focus on one of the three arguments of the Chazon Ish against Reb Chaim. And he says the following. Second. Where does he talk about the two sisters? Just 1 second. Okay, this is the piece about Masa. It's also very fascinating. But where's the piece about the Shtei Achios?
Here, Gimel, at the top of the left column. B'mikdash Shnei Achiyot.
Where is that?
Yeah.
On the top of...
The bottom of the top paragraph on the left side.
Okay, very good. Gimel. Okay, good.
Oh, yeah, no, we did. Rachel Leah. Yeah.
Says the Chazon Ish, b'makadesh Shtei Achios, gam ein habiur, meaning Reb Chaim's understanding of Rabbah's application to a person who's makadesh both Rachel and Leah, shechalos kedusha vasachas monas chalos kedusha min hashniya. This is what Reb Chaim says, and if you ask me, it's intuitively correct. I don't know why the Chazon Ish is cheppering here Reb Chaim. Reb Chaim is just saying that the chalos ishas to Leah has a koach hamonas to prevent the chalos isha to Rachel. No, says Chazon Ish. That's not so. Elakevit shechal kiddushin biachas mehem chal al achosa din erva v'ein kiddushin tofsim be'erva. Watch this. The Chazon Ish is claiming that there's nothing about the kiddushin to Rachel that's antithetical to the kiddushin to Leah, her sister, but rather What happens is, as a result of the Kedushin to Rachel, Leah becomes an erva, the Ein Kedushin Tosin be erva. Reb Chaim has no problem with that. Reb Chaim would embrace that definition. It's absolutely correct. But that would still allow Rabba's principle to apply to Shtei Achios, even according to the Rambam, because what happens is that since the Kedushin to Rachel inherently makes Leah into an erva, that Kedushin has within it a kocham of vatel es Kedushay Leah. Do you follow? The Chazon Ish sees it as like an indirect process. Really, the Kedushin of Rachel does not impose any barrier and prevent the Kedushin to Leah. But what happens is, as a result of the Kedushin of Rachel, she becomes an erva Leah. And therefore, in Kedushin Tosu Berva. That's not how we understand it. It's not a two-stage process. It's not a Mitzius. It's not that Mitzius he can't be Mekadesh Leah because what? Well, what Mitzius has changed over here? So is that I don't know. Is that a Mitzius or is that something that halachically, legally is inherent in the Kedushin to Rachel?
I think that's a Mitzius and then come up.
Anyway, you could probably think about this from now until Mashiach time. And
So I would say the differences between the Mitzias is it's not.
Which is an interesting hara.
This
This is the only erva where if one dies, you can marry the other one. So the nature of the Isser might be different. It might be, again, you're saying that
it's like a temporary.
even though the Chazon, when I look at these two women, I'm getting married. I don't see Isser.
But
I see Mutter and Mutter.
at the moment that they're both alive, then the Kedushin to one precludes the Kedushin to the other. And I would say that that's a Siba Hamonas. It's not just a change in Mitzias. I don't know, the Chazon Ish sees it like, all right, now she's an error as a result of the Kedushin.
That is true.
Again, I only because we started a little late today, and I would love to go through the Meiser business, but I just, Rabbosai, if you don't mind, again, I apologize for this, but I have to tell you the following. Rav Zevin says the following. Listen carefully. Rav Zevin says that as a general rule, Reb Chaim was opposed to something called klolin. Now, Reb Chaim did not compare one sugya to the other and say, well, we have a lumdus, we have a klal from one sugya, let's see if we can compare it to the other. That's not Reb Chaim's approach. Ein lekarev es harechokim b'zro. However, this is Rav Zevin's breakthrough in his understanding of Reb Chaim. Even if Reb Chaim is not willing, he's not eager and ready to compare methodologies from one sugya to the other and underlying principles from one sugya to the other. Nevertheless, mitoch shemahalech hamachshava toranit shelo hi shitatit. Once you see that Reb Chaim has a methodological approach and he applies it ba'ofen ikvi, consistently, then memela, what we can do is we can compare that conceptual structure from one sugya to the other. And the reason why I'm so excited about this, I get very excited about this, is because I don't want to go into history, but I spent many, many years, I was a Ram in Maleh Dumim, and I spent many years on trying to understand Reb Chaim's methodology. And I have a lot of stories to tell you about the guys in Maleh Dumim, Berkat Moshe at that time. But bottom line is, when 35 years later they had an anniversary get together, they asked me to come and speak about Reb Chaim's methodology. The original Miyastim, the first Talmidim of Maleh Dumim, still remembered what I did. And this is what Rav Zevin is trying to do. L'mashal, he gives the following example, where you see Reb Chaim's methodology. He says, Reb Chaim over and over again, without comparing sugyas, will always make a distinction between siba hamonas es chaloso shel din yadua. If there's a reason why this will prevent something else from being chal, as opposed to heder mitziuso, as opposed to the absence of it. And it's very interesting. Yofe koch heder hamitzius mi siba monas. In other words, when there's no mitzius at all, like he's going to talk about Chatzi Eved, Chatzi Ben Chorin with regard to Piri Rivya, but then he gets to our sugi. Harei dugma acheres kol sheida b'zecher zefilu vasachas eno. And the Gemara uses this on Simultainiously base. In Nedarim lift showed Abaya ma din bebal shamalishto Chaim umufer lichi vas achas. Pirush Haran she'en kan lo HaKama v'lo Hafara kiderech she'amru b'mekadish shtei achios ki achas. That since he can't be mekadosh Rachel after Leah, therefore both kedushin blow each other up and exclude each other. But v'lo kein pasuk Rambam amar lo Chaim mufer loch b'vas achas. Hareze Chaim, you have it in your phone. Gedolim chekre lev, meaning great interpreters. Nischabtu lahavid is das haram latimam sugyas agmar. Reb Chaim yesh lo derech mishalo. Kol she'eno b'zecher zeh lo nemar ela k'shechaloso shel ha'echad monas es chaloso shel ha'sheni mitzad adin. Aval lo b'mikre shacharei chaloso shel echad ein mitzius v'makom lasheni. There's no room for the other one because there's no mitzius. And ba'HaKama ba'Hafara she'ena b'zecher zeh yesh lahavdil. There's a fundamental distinction. Hafara eina chal achar HaKama lefi shezeu din HaKama. That's the din of HaKama, that HaKama precludes Hafara. That's the entire essence of HaKama, that the Torah gave a HaKama, recognized HaKama that invalidates Hafara. HaNeder yeshno b'mitzius. After HaKama there is a neder, so why can't you be made for the neder? That's because of the koach inherent in the HaKama. Ubiyeser tokev. El shezeu etzem din HaKama, that's inherent in the very chalos din of HaKama, she'lo yuchal lahafer achar. Aval HaKama she'ena chal achar Hafara, that's not because there's something inherent in the Hafara as far as its koach and chalos, but rather reza lefisha ein mitzius neder. You cannot be mekayim if the neder is gone. Kishahefer, and now we're on page 57. This batal a neder. Val ma tachul HaKama. How could HaKama be chal? There's no neder. Ilu yitzuyaher. Oh, this is beautiful. If theoretically you could have that the neder would be kayim, it could exist after Hafara, which is impossible. But theoretically, in the conceptual abstract world, if the neder after Hafara would still be alive and well, he could be mekayim it. The Hafara doesn't preclude HaKama. The Hafara only removes the neder, and therefore you can't be mekayim the neder. Lefichach al Hafara achar HaKama. If you're talking about there was HaKama first, then the Hafara can't be chal, and then we're going to apply the principle of Eino Bazecher Zeh. Aval al HaKama for Hafara. But if on the other hand he starts with what? With Hafara, and then he gets to HaKama, well, guess what? That has nothing to do with Rabbah. That has nothing to do with Kol She'eino Bazecher Zeh, because Eino Bazecher Zeh means that there's a Mania, Al Pi Din, that's inherent in one chalos, that prevents and negates the other chalos. They're antithetical, mutually exclusive. But here it's not so. You could have HaKama after Hafara if only the neder was still alive and well. Me'ata cheshbe meduyak HaKama v'Hafara b'vas achas Hafara eina chala v'HaKama chala. Meaning, we're not going to apply the principle of Rabbah vis-a-vis the HaKama because it's not the Hafara that negates the HaKama, and therefore, if we're going to have the HaKama negate the Hafara, then there's no Hafara operative, and therefore the HaKama could be chal, and that's the Shita Saram. But what's interesting here about Rav Zevin in Yishiv Shitot is he shows you sugya after sugya after sugya. Reb Chaim uses the same methodology, and it's absolutely stunning to see Rav Zevin's creative mind. Of course, he knows all of Shas. I don't know if you know about Rav Zevin. He had everything at his fingertips. And then he takes the Reb Chaim in this sugya and the Reb Chaim in that sugya, and he shows you consistently the methodology of Reb Chaim. Okay, then Rabbosai, I guess what time is it now? Oh, it's already 9:30, so we'll stop here. I just want to give you a little bit of homework here in the Chazon Ish on this page that I gave you. On the top left, we read that first paragraph, only the half at the bottom about Kedushin, but he has a beautiful sugya about a person who is mafresh maser, and then he adds another maser. And he wants to extend maser to other payros. And the halacha is misukanim, his payros have the tikkun of the first maser, but mikulkolim. And the question is, do we apply the principle of Rabbah in that case of Hafrasha Achar Hafrasha? And he says that according to Reb Chaim, there should be no reason why we apply that principle, and yet the Gemara in Eruvin does apply that principle. So if you get a chance, in your spare time, when you have nothing else to do with your time, this is something very exciting, this case of Marbe Masrosa. Okay, then?
Well, thank you.
Thank you so much. If anyone wants these pages, I have nothing to do with them. We didn't have time. We need another shear for these pages.
They're big pages.